All right. In this video, I want to talk about prophecy and how this proves God, right? So, I'm going to talk about some prophecies. One of the main ones is the one that really got me to look at the Bible differently and really got into the Bible because I was like, wait a second. God told us how all the kingdoms are going to be till the end of time. I was like, huh, that's something right there. I'll tell you that. So anyway, I'm going to get into a simple one here to start off, just a little appetizer, right? Over here in Luke chapter 21, at verse 20, it says, "And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled." Right? I'm gonna just stop there so I can talk about it a little bit. This was written at the latest date I saw that it was put together is in 60 AD. Jerusalem was compassed and besieged by Rome in 70 AD. So this is a prophecy that was fulfilled 10 years later. And the interesting thing is when Rome came and besieged Jerusalem, the Christians knew what was up. And at that time, I think there was an illness or a sickness of some kind that made even the death of the emperor. I can't remember what it was, but something caused a actual delay. I think it was like a 5-month delay before Rome actually did anything. They had all the armies compassed around Jerusalem, but it was about 5 months, so it gave everybody time to actually get out, right? And that's exactly what this warning says. And they got out. And then all of a sudden the orders were given, besiege, and we're going to take out this city. And it's interesting because it's like another little prophecy talking about the rapture, right? The Christians are going to be taken out while God's going to turn back to the Jews, right? And that's what ended up happening. These Jews who ended up denying their Messiah were besieged for a long enough time where their food ran out. Like it says here, woe unto them that have children and give suck in those days. Well, at that time, the hunger got so bad where people were eating each other's children, eating their own children, making deals to eat one of their children today and the other one's child tomorrow, and then running off and not eating their child the next day, and all kinds of really disturbing stuff. Not to mention, Rome actually came in and wiped them all out. I wouldn't say all of them, but they defeated them, killed over 1 million Jews, and destroyed the temple and the sanctuary there. They tore it all down. Not one stone left upon another. Took all the gold. And yeah, that was a prophecy. Some people would say, well, this was written after the fact. I would agree with you that that could be a possibility, other than we have the stories of the Christians leaving at that time, where they were paying attention to this and they got out of the city. While the Jews were kind of like, God's with us. We will stand up against Goliath, right? And it didn't work out, right? So this is a very interesting one right here. There's a whole bunch I could get into concerning Jesus, right? That would fill up a lot of time talking about all the stuff talked about Jesus, like in Isaiah, about how they're going to look at me, the one that they've pierced, or God saying it of himself. They're going to look at me, the one they've pierced, right? It even talks about pierced in his hands and his feet, talking about being crucified long before crucifixion was even a means of punishment and of justice for crimes or anything, right? Capital punishment, right? Very interesting stuff like that. Uh, but yeah, even born of a virgin, going to be born in Bethlehem. to come up out of Egypt. He called a Nazarite, and he's a Nazarene and all this stuff. I mean, there's so much you could get into there. But what I'm going to get into here is more for people who they don't give two shits about Jesus. They don't give two shits about grace. They don't care about getting saved. I want to talk to you. You know, you're an atheist or somewhere along those lines, some kind of agnostic. Well, stuff is going to happen pretty soon. Right? There's, like I said, a rapture. It's another prophecy. Like Enoch being taken up before the flood. Right? Enoch representing the church being taken up, and Noah representing Israel going through the storm that's to come. We have Joseph, second in the kingdom, representing Jesus, second to the Father, marrying a Gentile right before a 7-year famine in Egypt, where the Jews have to come to Joseph to be fed. So we get a picture of the rapture there. You get a picture of it in the Song of Solomon's. You get a picture of it with Lot being taken out of Sodom and Gomorrah, and then destruction comes upon Sodom and Gomorrah after he's taken out. You can find these things again with even Elijah, right? Where he represents the church, and Elisha, I really emphasize that so you know it's two different people. Elijah and Elisha, right? Two different people. Names sound similar, one with a J, one with an S. Well, Elijah, they knew he was going to be taken up. They knew exactly when he was going to be taken up. That's a symbol of the church being taken. And Elisha, he received a double portion because he saw it happen. He's going to be a representation of the Jews, the two witnesses, the 144,000, and the rest of the Gentiles that end up believing and giving up their lives during the tribulation, right? And hopefully you're one of them. Because for some reason you didn't want to accept God's grace. But let's get into this here so you know what's about to happen. This is the prophecy right here that really got my attention, right? In Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, but he doesn't remember the dream, and Daniel ends up being one of the people that actually can tell him his dream. You ever had that happen where you don't remember a dream, but then somebody says something or something happens and all of a sudden you remember the dream? So when Daniel tells him the dream, Nebuchadnezzar is like, oh, yes, I remember it now, right? So he knows that he's not lying, and then he tells him the interpretation. He tells him about this dream of a statue of a man with a head of gold, with a chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and then feet of iron and clay. And what I want to focus on is at the end here, because a lot of people say, oh yeah, you know, Babylon is the head of gold, Medo-Persia is the chest and arms of silver, and the belly and thighs of brass are Greece, but that's because that was all written after the fact. Yet all the writings that we have of Daniel show that Rome came after, right? So if you want to say that Daniel was written after the Medes and the Persians and after the Grecian Empire, okay. But from everybody's agreement, it was written before Rome. Rome became an empire. And here, Rome, conquering with their iron weapons, their iron broadswords, is said here, verse 33 says, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and of clay, and brake them in pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like chaff of the summering threshing floor, and the wind carried them away, and no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. So what we actually see what happened here is the Roman Empire is the legs of iron. And the Roman Empire split into two. The Western and Eastern Empire, you got the one taken over by the Catholic Church, the other by the Orthodox Church. And then eventually it comes to the feet. And the feet are iron and clay. And we're going to read a little bit more about that as we come down here. It talks a bit more about it. It says, and the fourth kingdom shall be as be strong as iron. For as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all things, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes part of potter's clay, notice how it makes sure you know that it's potter's clay, and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, so it's letting you know it's dirty, and as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves together with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Okay, so there's a lot to say about this. A lot, right? So the iron, Rome, eventually ends up becoming the feet. And we're at that point. We're in the feet, and it's about to get to the 10 toes. But what is the clay? Well, when we read the scriptures, we see that the clay represents God's people, right? Israel, the Jews. You could even say, to an extent, the Christians, right? We're supposed to be the clay. He's the potter. We're supposed to let him mold us into the image that he sees fit, right? We don't get to decide what we are and what we're not. God does. We have to submit to what he makes of us, right? So we see here that it's potter's clay, so God's people have mixed with the empire. Not only, it says they're miry clay, so they're dirty, they're unclean. That would mean that they're not righteous, that they're sinful, right? And we see this actually happen in Jesus' day. When Jesus is being put on trial, the Jews bring him to Pilate, and they say, "We have no king but Caesar," because Pilate's like, "Hey, you want me to crucify your king?" He's like, they say, "We have no king but Caesar." So right there, they deny Jesus as their king to set up the kingdom of heaven. And they said, "We have no king but Caesar." So they joined themselves right there with the iron. And like you say, that they don't mingle together. Well, how do you think it's been with the Roman Empire and the Jews? They don't quite come together. They are always button heads, and even at times murder, slaughter, right? We see at one time, just said the most recent one everybody's familiar with, Germany, Nazi Germany, slaughtering Jews, and then all of a sudden, we're going to help them get to their homeland. And then while helping them to the homeland, which England promised to do, England betrayed them, right? So you see this mixing but not quite mixing together constantly through Jewish history with the Roman Empire, right? But not only that, the Christians did the same thing. The Christians were being persecuted by both the Jews and the Romans. And eventually, they ended up mixing with this kingdom as well, basically saying, "We have no king but Caesar," by making the Pope Pontifex Maximus, which is the title of the head priest of the Roman Empire, which was a title given to the Emperor of Rome. They gave that to the Pope, and he became the head of the church and the head of the state. And even now, the Vatican is both a state and head of a religion, right? And they got the Pontifex Maximus, a pagan priest, as its head. So we see there that the Christians, they're mirely mixed with this clay, iron as well, with this kingdom. So it's partly strong, it's partly weak, it's partly tough, but it's partly broken. And that's how the Roman Empire is now. So we're just waiting for these 10 kings to show up by the 10 toes, as it says here. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. Here, the rock cut without hands. This is Jesus, the chief cornerstone, the foundation stone, the foundation of the church, the rock of offense, the stumbling stone. So many different names for this, right? Jesus is this stone. And he comes down because part of the dream is this stone comes from heaven and is cut out without hands. It comes from God. Jesus returns, destroys all the Gentile kingdoms here, because that's what this is, the Gentile kingdoms, and he establishes the kingdom of heaven, right? And that's what the Jews were looking for the Messiah to do in their time. But in their time, the Roman Empire had not become mixed with the miry clay, and it did not have 10 rulers over it. We're actually waiting for that to actually establish now. And things could get there pretty soon. You're actually looking at events. America looks like it's falling apart here. We lost billions. I think it was like $85 billion worth of military equipment to Afghanistan when we left out of there. We shut down the Keystone Pipeline, which makes us energy dependent, which gives more way for like Russia and the Middle Eastern countries to have sway. You actually see Islam is growing and spreading. Canada and in Europe quite a bit, starting to get a foothold into America as well, the United States, and it's starting to have more leeway and taken over. Some people take that as an example of the clay and the iron mixing together because they look at the iron as the Roman Empire and they see the clay, the miry clay, as God's people, but in the sense that it came from Abraham through Ishmael and not through the promised seed of Isaac, so that they would still be considered that. I don't quite agree with it, but I entertain it because it is interesting that that's could be what's going on, that part of this miry clay, the dirty clay, is the seed of Ishmael, right? That the clean clay would actually be the Jews and the Christians, right? The miry clay is Islam, the Muslims, and they're mixing with this kingdom right now. And that could be something that's actually part of the fulfilling of this prophecy here. Honestly, I think it's a mixture of all of that because we see that the Jews said they had no king but Caesar. We see the Christians put their guy as the head of the Roman Empire, the Pontifex Maximus, and we see now that not only has the Vatican came out with a document saying that they worship the same God as the Muslims, but the Pope is saying that and helped forming Chrislam, which is mixing of Catholicism, Judaism, and Islam, and they have a joint church opening in Dubai this year, 2022, might already be opened, and it's just what they call the Abrahamic house, and or the Abrahamic family house, something along those lines, and it's just uniting them all, right? But we know that they have contradicting views, so it's like iron mixed with clay. They don't quite stick together. Another interesting thing is it says that they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. So it's like, what do they mean by they mixing with the seed of men? So it's saying like they is not of men. And there's a lot of people talking about things like the return of the Nephilim. That when the rapture happens, that they're going to explain it away by aliens doing it. And then all of a sudden we're going to have alien visitation. And they're going to tell everybody some bullshit lie. And they're going to mingle themselves with men. And they're actually going to actually try to mingle sexually, if not sexually, using science to mix themselves with men. And it won't quite cleave together. Other people take this as like the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast is some kind of microchip of some kind, and when you take it, you're the clay mixing with the iron, and it doesn't quite cleave together, and that's why the people who take the mark end up getting sores on their hands and their forehead because their body's rejecting this implant. And I think all these things fulfill it. Like a lot of people think, no, it's only going to be filled this way. Like some people will say, oh, the clay is only the Jews. The clay is only, it's the Holy Roman Catholic Empire. right? Or some people now, it's the Roman Empire mixing with the Muslims. I say it's all. I say all of it is a fulfillment of it. I think there's many layers to it, and different people are able to see different things, and I think they're all part of it. But anyway, uh, since we're getting into these prophecies, this one I thought was one of the more simpler ones that gets you go, wow, that's interesting. That's very interesting. So that means that when we see these 10 kings pop up, that Jesus is going to come and destroy these kingdoms. Right? So you can start looking for him pretty soon, right? Especially if you hear of a rapture and all these people just went missing. You definitely be like, oh shit, this was right, this is true. And maybe you get your act together. But anyway, here's an interesting one. Daniel chapter 9 at verse 24, it says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. Now, I have this highlighted to give you the context of this paragraph. The context of this paragraph is the 70 weeks, right? So that's 490 days, right? And it's a day for a year prophecy, right? So that's 490 years. And this actually tells you when the Messiah is going to show up. That's why everybody in the time of Jesus was going, hey, where's the Messiah? He's supposed to be here. Who's the Messiah? Is it you, John the Baptist? And then with Jesus, he's doing his thing, and the religious leaders are like, no, you're not the Messiah because you are against us, right? And you won't be against us. You're going to be for us. You're here to kiss our ass if you were the Messiah because we're so good and righteous. And it's like, no, that's not how it is, right? So what we see here is this is supposed to start at the going forth of the commandment. This is when it starts to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem. Now, each one of these might be a separate starting point because it says to restore and then to build. And as it says here, it splits it into 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Right? So it's like, why does it split it? Why does it split it into 2 different times? Well, it seems like at the command to restore, there'll be 7 weeks, so 49 years. And then the command to rebuild will be in troublous times, and I don't think it's going to take the rest of the 62 weeks, but I think that's when the next 62 weeks start. So the command to restore, 7 weeks after that, then there's probably this command here. That's probably what is being said. But there's all kinds of different dates to when this starts, but they're all within the same time period. So that's why people think that Jesus died as early as I've seen 27 AD, and I've seen as late as like 35 AD, because the different times at the start of this commandment is when they usually start the dating of this time to figure out when Jesus was actually born and proclaimed a Messiah and crucified, right? And I was actually talking to Seventh-day Adventists about this prophecy because they say it's already been fulfilled, but it hasn't been fulfilled because, you see, they say that it was fulfilled shortly after Jesus was crucified. There was 3.5 years, and then they say that's when Stephen was stoned, and that was the end of the 70 weeks. It's like, okay, but it says here, the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. So we see that there's a prince that shall come that shall destroy the Jerusalem and the sanctuary after it's rebuilt. That did not happen within the 70 weeks. Right? It did not. No. And I'm going to explain to you that this has been cut. This has been cut. Like we see, there's a period of 7 weeks, and then there's the start, something that triggers the start of the 62 weeks. Right? And then the Messiah. A lot of people say that this is the Antichrist, But it's like, no, this is talking about the Messiah. It says, and he shall confirm the covenant. So it's not saying he's making a 7-year covenant. He's confirming a covenant. And it's not just a covenant. It is the definite article, covenant. And the way I describe this to people is, in the Hebrew, you can read Satan, and that just means adversary. It doesn't mean the actual being that we call Satan. But then you would see the definite article, right? The covenant, it would be the Satan, or in the Hebrew, ha-satan. This ha is the definite article, right? Ha-satan. That is the Satan. That would be the actual being that we call Satan, the adversary, the accuser. So when it says the covenant, this is talking about the Messiah is going to confirm the new covenant for many for 1 week. So for 7 years. Right? That's the last week of the 70 weeks. Because we have the 7 weeks and we have the 62 weeks. That's 62. So 62 and 7, what do we got? 69. 1 week left. And it talks about the Messiah is going to confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. But in the midst of the week, he's going to cause the sacrificing and oblation to cease. And that's exactly what we see with the Messiah. When he's 30 years old, Jesus is baptized and the Holy Spirit comes upon him. God says, this is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. Tells everybody to listen to him. And he starts his ministry. That's the start of confirming the covenant for 7 years. 3.5 years in, he is crucified. He's cut off, but not for himself. Right? And another thing to show you that this is not chronological is that, again, it says the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, right? But a lot of people will say, oh, this is the Antichrist, and then he's going to destroy the city, right? And it's like, well, it says the cities are going to be destroyed first, right? So this is not something that's happening in chronological order, as if the 70 weeks have been fulfilled already in Jesus' time, then it's missing this part. This part didn't happen, so what's going on here, right? This is just repeating about the Messiah being cut off, and it's telling you right here, and halfway through the week, 3.5 years, the length of Jesus' ministry, he is crucified, and that causes a sacrifice and oblation to cease, because God no longer accepted it. The veil in the temple was ripped. Everybody could see into the most holy place, because everybody's invited in, because you have been cleansed by the blood of Jesus. Right? That's what it was telling everybody. There's no more need of the Levitical priesthood. It's done. Right? So, it goes on to say, and for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. Right? And that's what happened in 70 AD. It was made desolate. When? For how long anyway? Until the consummation. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So it's going to be desolate until the time when everything is going to be consummated, and everything that's determined upon the desolate is going to be poured out upon them. And we know that time is near because Israel is back in the land, 1948. That doesn't mean the 70 week has already started. It means we got to be looking at, hey, this is about to happen. Because Jesus tells us about the fig tree. Add another prophecy there. He says, when you see the fig tree, which represents the nation of Israel, start to put forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. And that's when the rapture is probably going to happen, in that kind of season. Right? He's letting you know. And he notice how Jesus says that when it brings forth leaves, not when it brings forth fruit. Right? And that's what we have with Israel. They're bringing forth leaves, but not fruit. And what I mean by that is they're not believing on Jesus as the Messiah. So they're not bringing forth the fruit. They're just bringing forth leaves. They got their own righteousness. They don't have the righteousness of God. Right? That's what we actually see in the world today, in prophecy being fulfilled. But now I'm going to show you how this last week is actually cut off. Right? Because this continues into chapter 10 here. Right? He's still being told here about stuff that's going on. And you see this stuff has to do a lot with Persia and Greece. But then, right here at verse 14, he says, Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days, for yet the vision is for many days. Right? Because there's a break. There's a break in the finishing of the 70 weeks, because it's to bring an end of sin, make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring everlasting righteousness and seal up the vision. That did not happen when Stephen was stoned 3.5 years after Jesus was crucified, if that's even how long after Jesus was crucified that Stephen was stoned. But let's just say it is. This did not happen, and neither did the prince coming to destroy the city and the sanctuary. That did not happen within the 70 weeks. Right? It's because what God did is he stopped and he goes, well, let's stop the time here, put on the brakes. And he's like, now we're having a time of grace. And you've noticed that in the Old Testament, and even with the apostles for a while, that they were doing miracles. Well, miracles are a sign to the Jew. The church doesn't walk by sight, they walk by faith. And that's what we're in now. We're in the period of grace where we walk by faith, not by sight. Right? We don't go by the miracles. Not that miracles can't happen, but that's just not something that's we rely on. We rely on faith, the faith in the Word of God. Right? It's a different dispensation. And during this time of Jacob's trouble that's coming, all of a sudden we read in Revelation that miracles are happening again. It's because the time has changed back to the actual Gentiles. I'm going to show you that this has been broken. This is the first part here, talking to you about how this is going to be cut off to the end of days. It explains it a bit more when we actually get into the next chapter, because right here, all of a sudden, Daniel's talking about how this is just taking a toll on him, right? He's getting weakened because he was also fasting. I think it was for like 21 days or so, and now he's having this vision and he's feeling pretty weak or whatnot. But then we come over here, and we're finishing on with this, right? He's telling them about what's going on, and these kind of things you can read about. And it's interesting that this happened verbatim with Greece after it broke up into 4 separate kingdoms after Alexander the Great died. And what happened between these kings is described here, not only with the kings, but with their wives and with their sons and daughters. It's pretty detailed. That's why a lot of people say it was written after the fact. But the stuff that has to do with Rome was not. So even if you want to dismiss the rest of it, saying it was written after the fact, well, the stuff we're reading right now hasn't, right? I'd like to start right here. It says at verse 27, all of a sudden there's a change. All of a sudden as it cuts. Like he's telling them what's going on. Then he says, And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Right? And then over here, verse 29, it tells you about what's going to happen at the appointed time. Right? This doesn't necessarily mean the end, but we start to actually get the hint of that, especially when we read right here. It says, For the ships of Shittim. I looked into Shittim, and Shittim is actually described as Italy or Rome before it was actually known as Rome. So it's saying their ships are going to come against these kings over here, right? And it has something to do with the Holy Covenant going on, right? And this is where we read one of the more famous ones. I have to explain this one a little bit because it says, And the arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. Now, a lot of people like to say this is Antiochus Epiphanes, who wouldn't let the Jews actually offer up their sacrifices and didn't let them celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, and actually put up an idol that looked like himself. It was supposed to be Zeus. Told him to worship it as God. He put it in the most holy place, and then he sacrificed a pig in the temple. And they had to have the Maccabees rebellion, to kick them out, and then they had to rededicate the temple, and that's where you get Hanukkah, where they celebrated tabernacles a little while later because the temple was polluted, right? So a lot of people say, oh, this already happened. Wrong. Because Jesus, who's obviously after Antiochus Epiphanes, said that when you see the abomination of desolation that Daniel spoke of, he talked about it that it's something to happen in the future. Right? So this is something that's in the future from Jesus, and this has not have happened yet. So we're getting the understanding that when it says the time of the end, that there's a little switch here, that the things that are being talked about here, they can be things that have happened in the past, but at the same time, they're telling us of things that are going to happen in the future. You get what I'm saying? Like, there's nothing new under the sun. What has happened will happen again. Right? So anyway, he goes on talking about such as do wickedly against the covenant, shall he corrupt with flatteries. That's what they talk about the Antichrist, right? He's going to flatter everybody. I think of somebody like Donald Trump. I'm not saying he's the Antichrist. I just think of somebody like him because he's always like, oh yeah, you're the best. You know, you're the best writer there is. If I was going to write a book, I would have you write it because you're the best. Right? He just totally kisses ass, and he's actually kind of good at it and kind of funny. Right? But you know that that's what he's doing. He's just a salesman, and he just has a weird way of going about it, and it seems to work for him. But that's what I think of, the flatteries. And the Christians, how quickly they back up someone like Trump, who's obviously, you know, just that, a salesman, you know, snake oil salesman, a flatterer. But anyway, down here at verse 35 it says, and some of them of understanding shall fall to try them and to purge and to make them white even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. So we see here that it has actually made that shift to the time of the end, right? And we're going to show you that this is not the time of the end of the 70 weeks in the time of Jesus, but that has been cut off to be finished at the end. Kind of like Jesus making the day stand still, right? The sun stand still so that the day didn't end for a whole day itself. It's just a little grace period. Then at verse 40, it makes that a bit clearer. At the time of the end, right? Everything's going to be brought down here. Got distracted there, saw a little spider. But anyway, from here, actually, I want to jump to chapter 12. Lost my thought there anyway, so this is good. Chapter 12, and I think this is interesting. At that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, standeth for the children of thy people. Which is interesting because you go to Revelation chapter 12, and Michael's the one that does battle with the dragon and kicks him out of heaven with the third of his angels, right? And it's kind of interesting connection there. And another interesting thing is that when we come to these verses right here, 6 and where does 7 end? It says, and one said to the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand upon heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time, times and a half, and when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy place, all these things shall be accomplished. Now, right here we read a time and a half. And when you go to Revelation chapter 12, when Michael stands up, there's a 3.5 year period where Israel, not the church, Israel. Israel's the one that gave birth to Jesus, not the church. She escapes into the wilderness, right? And it says for 1,260 days, or the second time it says is that she flees is a times and a half a time. It uses this exact phrase, right? Very, very interesting that we see that this last 3.5 years of the confirming of the covenant will be finished because Jesus was cut off halfway through confirming it. So he's going to reconfirm it at the end. Do the last 3.5 years of it. I know a lot of people say that there's a 7-year tribulation. Maybe. But a lot of what I see has to do with actually 3.5 years. You see it mentioned, I think, 5 times in Revelation. And no one really tries to explain, well, that these certain things happened in the first 3.5 years and these things happened in the second 3.5 years. I don't get how they see that, but, I could be wrong, But anyway, again, he's asking, what shall be the end of these things? And he says, hey, don't worry about it. This is sealed till the time of the end, right? And why is it sealed to the time of the end? Because we're going to need to know about it now. It's not going to be needed to know until now, right? And that's why it's being unsealed. This is the next interesting thing right here, as it talks about basically the times and a half a time. But it talks about not 1,260 days, it's 1,290 days, right? So it's an extra month. So it's 3.5 years and a month. So 3 years and 7 months. And then over here we got 1,335 days, which is an extra 75 days to that, which would make another 2.5 months. So it would be 3 years, 9 months, and 15 days, right? So it's interesting, like, what is going on here? And it says, from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away and the abomination that make deathless set up, this is how much time, right? And we read that back here, right? At verse, 31? Let's go back up here. So I'm going to tell you some interesting things here. People set dates here, and they say, okay, Antiochus Epiphanes did this. And they go, okay, so let's use this first time, 1,290 days. And that brings us to around, I don't remember this where Antiochus Epiphanes actually did that, what date. But when you add the 1,290 days, you get to 688 AD, roughly right there. And that's around the time that the dome of the mosque was put on the Temple Mount. And they say that the daily sacrifices were taken away by Antiochus Epiphanes, so we start the first date there, and now you do the 335 days at the abomination that make it desolate, which is the Dome of the Mosque put at the Temple Mount. So they add, a day for a year, and you add the 1,335 days to that, you get to 2023. And it's telling you, blessed who comes to that point. And it's kind of like, okay, you got my attention. I am not saying this is, the end of this prophecy. I'm saying it's very interesting look, right? I'm saying pay attention because if it's true, it's right around the corner. So we should pay attention. And if it doesn't happen, okay, it wasn't true. We move on, right? No biggie. Right? I'm not saying this is definitely how to interpret this, and this is their starting point, and this is the end point. I'm all about you take the Bible for what it says. But if I'm going to start with the daily sacrifices and the abomination of desolation, personally, I wouldn't start with the Antiochus Epiphanes. I do look at that as an example of what it would be, and will apply these things to it, like what is done right here. And you come up with some interesting things. But I would go with what Jesus said, and he says, when you see the abomination of desolation that Daniel spoke of, again, he could have been talking about the Muslims putting up their temple, because that was still future from Jesus, right? But you want to know the interesting thing about that is if Jesus was actually talking about that the 1290 days would bring you to 1948. If you go from 688, it would bring you to 1948, which was the birth of Israel. And then 75 years later is this part, which is 2023. And that's interesting because when Abraham was 75 years old, he received the promise, right? So that's some interesting stuff, right? Very interesting stuff. It really caught my attention. So I was like, you know what? I'm paying attention, especially these coming years right here, especially around the Feast of Trumpets. That's where I'm thinking the rapture would happen, but could be wrong. Could be any day. Maybe it's Pentecost. A lot of people think it's second Passover with the blood moon this month that we're in right now. But yeah, I'm just putting these things out because prophecy is very interesting, and just to grab a hold of some of you people who are not really believers. So maybe you believe and you be warned. But thanks for watching and take care.